testes, ovaries will produce estrogen and progesterone. As I mentioned, everyone has some level of all of these. So if the gonads are not producing it, the adrenal cortex produces some of the steroid based. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about water-soluble hormones and lipid-soluble hormones. I'd suggest us to know two things. First, the big one is where will the receptors be for? Okay. So, if I said one of this passes through the plasma membrane, the other one does not, which one do we think? Water-soluble or lipid-soluble passes through the plasma membrane? Lipid-soluble. Why? Yeah, remember our plasma membrane is the bulk of the thickness of it is made up of? Yeah, it is phospholipid molecules, but which part of the phospholipids is the bulk? The tail, which is fatty acids, right? So these are hydrophobic. Fatty acids, which are hydrophobic. Okay, because they are non-polar. Okay, so polar substances will not really move through. Generally, water-soluble substances are polar; they do not move through the plasma. Okay, so water-soluble hormones will have their receptors. If this was the inside, the receptors has to be on the outside. Okay, because they cannot pass through it. And then we'll talk about this because the receptors are on the outside. Somebody has to take the message all the way up the nucleus. Okay, so that's going to be a secondary message. We'll talk briefly. For us, we just need to recognize that as a secondary. Okay. Whereas the lipid-soluble, they will pass through the membrane, they will directly influence it because they can pass through, the receptors are going to be in the cytoplasm, they can directly kind of communicate with the nucleus. Okay? So they can directly influence that. Some steroid-based, for example, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, those are lipid-soluble. Thyroid hormone is lipid-soluble. The thyroid-stimulating hormone is water-soluble. Okay? They are considered amino acid or protein based. They do not cross the plasma. Okay? Lipid-soluble cholesterol-based steroids, they can cross the plasma membrane, and hence they can directly influence the stimulate that cell development. Here's a pictorial view of the water-soluble. These would be the hormones. Just recognize that the receptor is going to be on the outside. Here's the plasma membrane, cytoplasm, so there's the inside of the cell. They do need a secondary messenger here. The secondary messenger is something called cyclic AMP. It is a cascade. Just recognize. So which one do you think will be quicker stimulus on the cell? Water-soluble or lipid-soluble? Okay, because they can go directly and stimulate. Okay. This is a slower process because there's a cascade. One stimulates the other and so on. And has to result in a secondary messenger, which then goes and passes the message to the nucleus. Lipid-soluble here is the pictorial view for the stool and the hormone. It can pass through the membrane, cytoplasm goes in, the receptors are found within the cytoplasm, they bind, they'll directly influence, right? So we talked about protein synthesis. What are the two main parts of protein synthesis during the sequence? Transcription and translation. So transcription is what to what? Gene to an mRNA, right? A part of the DNA gene to an mRNA, and translation is translating this information to the protein sequence, the amino acids. So this can directly influence protein synthesis in the cell because they are lipid soluble, they cross plasma membrane, they bind the receptor. Decide. Okay? So lipid soluble can diffuse through the plasma membrane, so they have an intracellular receptors, right? Water soluble does not, so they will have an extracellular receptor. Have the receptor on the membrane facing the outside, they need the second receptor. Okay? So that's those. Good. All right, let's talk about how two hormones may interact with each other. Okay, so there are a couple of terms. This one's the interesting one. Okay, permissiveness. This basically means the second one really doesn't have influence on the outcome, but it kind of needs to be present for the second one to work. I'll give you the example of growth hormone, right? If there was a child who had a short stature, growing very high, they will check that person's growth hormone, but they will also check a second hormone. Okay? Because if that hormone's low, doesn't matter how high the growth hormone is, this person will not. And that hormone is the thyroid. So thyroid hormone behaves in the permissiveness. So that it needs kind of, you think about it, growth hormone needs the permission of the thyroid hormone. Right? Thyroid hormone directly does not influence growth, but it does help with it. Okay, that's what permissiveness is. Synergism, hopefully you can tell me this one. They work together, they have the same outcome. For example, which hormone will increase glucose level in blood?
Glucagon.
Glucagon increases. Does anyone know any other, which is a hormone but also used as a drug that's given and also raises glucose level as a side effect? You don't usually give it to increase glucose level, but as a side effect. Yeah, the steroids, cortisol. Okay, that will also increase glucose level. So they are both synergistic, right? So during stress, cortisol will be also released, which will in advance need for glucose or presence of glucose, right? The sympathetic wants more glucose for vital blood. Okay? So synergism, both of them have the same. This one hopefully is easy. What does antagonism mean? Opposing. Can you give us two examples of hormones? We talked about both of them, two sets today.
Acetylcholine and acetylcholinesterase.
Ooh, that might be an interesting one, but acetylcholinesterase is actually not a hormone, it's an enzyme. Good thought process, will oppose each other. Yeah, one of them, glucagon will raise glucose levels, insulin will decrease blood glucose levels, right? So they are antagonistic to each other. What's the other one? With Burman. And PTH, right? They will affect calcium in the opposite direction. They're going to antagonist. Tropic means one basically stimulates the release of another. This is what we'll talk about, especially in terms of hypothalamus pituitary gland. A lot of them are tropic. They influence or they stimulate the release of another. Okay, for example, TSH. What does TSH stand for? Anybody know? Thyroid stimulating hormone. That's released from our anterior pituitary gland. What does it do? It stimulates our thyroid gland to do what? Release thyroxine. So this one is tropic. It influences the release of another hormone. Okay, that's what tropic means. It influences another hormone. Good example is TSH. It's kind of obvious, but there are others too which we'll talk about. So let's talk about the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. as I mentioned, pituitary gland, you can think of it as, they call it two glands, technically only one is a real gland, okay? So it's anterior pituitary, and then this one's going to be the posterior pituitary. If you notice, what do these yellow lines look like?
Cables.
Neurons, right? They look like multipolar neurons, right? There's the cell body, dendrites, and then the axon, while the axon terminals are here, okay? So this one is the one that's storing hypothalamic hormones. It's produced by the hypothalamus, just stored in the posterior pituitary gland and released. Anybody know which two they are? No. It's oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone, right? The others, they'll be released from the hypothalamus, but it has to go into the blood, come here, and then stimulate or inhibit the anterior pituitary gland. So this is to talk about the posterior pituitary gland. It's ADH, standing for antidiuretic hormone. Here it is. Okay, as well as oxytocin. So if there's a question about these two hormones, pay extra attention if it's asking for produced by or secreted by. Where is it produced by? Hypothalamus. It's produced by hypothalamic neurons. Where is it released from, secreted from? Not specifically. Posterior pituitary. Posterior pituitary is stored and released. It's not produced by posterior pituitary. It's produced by hypothalamic cells. Okay? So produced by the hypothalamus. This is hypothalamus cell. Okay? Stored here, God bless you, and then it will be released into the blood. It's antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. We'll talk a little bit more about how antidiuretic hormone works in the uterine system, but what's the big outcome of it? We'll keep that one in mind. What is the process of diuresis? Does anyone know?
It's sweating.
No? That's diaphoresis.
Mm-hmm.
Diuresis is to actually urinate. So it's not against urination, but it reduces the volume of urine. What does it do to urine? Or what happens when there's ADH? How is the reduction in volume achieved? What's it doing? Reabsorbing water. It's going to reabsorb water. We'll talk about the process more, exactly how it does in the uterine system, but we have to understand what it does. Okay, ADH will promote the reabsorption of water in the kidneys, which will end up with concentrated or less volume of urine and less urine. Well, what are a couple of activities of the oxytocin? Basically, three. We talk in terms of positive feedback oxytocin. Yeah, oxytocin helps in uterine contractions. If during delivery contractions decrease, we could give Syntox, which is basically synthetic oxytocin to promote oxytocin does promote uterine contraction. It also promotes mammary glands contracting, releasing milk. And one more, you might have heard of oxytocin as being, they usually just call it the love hormone. It's what keeps attached to people. It's secreted during closeness. So those are the functions of those. So here are the anterior pituitary gland hormones. And we'll talk about this. I have another slide from our textbook, what they're going to do. Growth hormone is kind of straightforward. What do you think growth hormone does, which is released from our anterior pituitary gland? It promotes growth of bones, promotes growth of the skeletal muscles. Okay? Thyroid stimulating, we already mentioned, it stimulates our thyroid gland to produce T3, T4. What's the 3 and 4 in T3, T4? It's to do with an element. If we do not have this element, we can lead to hypothyroidism. Iodine. So this was very common back in the 60s. What did FDA do? Recommended it being added to salt. That's why we have iodinized salt, because we don't get enough iodine from the food we generally consume. So take that to help. That's the 3, means there are 3 iodine atoms there, 4 So follicular stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormone have a lot of complexities, but we'll just learn the big common nature of it. Which follicular stimulating hormone, we can think of it as it's going to promote gamete production. So what's that going to be? Eggs or ovum and sperm. So these will stimulate. There's multiple more functions which we'll talk about in the reproductive. For now, we'll just separate them out. Those 2, while luteinizing hormone again has multiple functions, but here we will just learn as it's going to stimulate the release of the reproductive hormones, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone from the gamete, from the gonads. Okay? Well, what does prolactin do? Anybody can have prolactin production, but it's not usual. It's mothers, right? Lactating moms, it's to promote lactated milk production. But what promotes milk expulsion?
Oxytocin.
Oxytocin is one for milk expulsion, but milk production is prolactin. Normally, hypothalamus releases a prolactin inhibitory hormone. For most of us, that's what's being produced now. So the anterior pituitary gland will not release prolactin. In the absence of that, it will release prolactin. The last one, there is another one, but these are the important ones, is adrenocorticotropic hormone, right? It stimulates the adrenal cortex to produce one of the cortical hormones, which is the cortisol. Okay, so I'll put that into the next slide. So TSH will stimulate the thyroid gland to produce T3. Adrenocorticotropic hormone will cause the adrenal cortex to release cortisol. Okay? Prolactin stimulates the mammary glands to produce the milk. Growth hormone will stimulate bones. What bone is that, by the way? You recognize that bone? That's the humerus. You can see the top of it. Okay. Will stimulate bones to grow and skeletal muscles too. While the FSH main function we'll learn as that's a follicular stimulating hormone, will stimulate the development of gametes, ovum and sperm. While the luteinizing hormone, again we'll talk about more of the functions, but the main one we'll talk about here, it's going to stimulate the release of testosterone from the testes, estrogen, progesterone from the ovaries. Okay? This is from the posterior pituitary gland. ADH is anti-diuretic hormone. Is it produced in the posterior pituitary gland? No, it's only secreted, stored and secreted. Where is it produced by? Again, this is the hypothalamus, right? It's going to stimulate the kidneys to reabsorb water, so the urine will be too fast. We don't have to stop, hopefully not, we don't get to that stage, because we need to urinate, we're getting rid of electrolytes, we're getting rid of urea, which is a toxin. If it collects too much in our body, it will cause damage. So we do need to urinate. Yes, there are cases, anuria means there's no urine, but really we want oliguria, decrease. And then the oxytocin will stimulate uterine contractions during childbirth. but during menstruation too. Okay? During periods, people have those pains. That's due to oxytocin being released. We talk about it. It stimulates muscles of the uterus here, not to expel something. Well, it is expelling something, but it's not a fetus, but it's expelling the inner lining of the uterus. Right? The endometrium.
So is that your simulating the lack of oxytocin?
Kinda, but they don't both have the same outcome, but the desired outcome is there, so yes and no. It's not the same, but yeah, one before the other. But yeah, sure. While oxytocin will cause the release of the milk. Here it's production of milk, prolactin producing. Slight difference, but yeah, could be consistent. So we talked about positive feedback versus negative feedback. Positive is good, negative is bad. Right? That's the difference. How are they different? What's negative feedback? They're both kind of are.
It's happening for like a purpose to maintain their system. So like the contractions, like it's to get something to happen. So
Reinforces the statement.
Right.
There we go. Because both of them are the main, you said both correctly, right? Both help to maintain homeostasis, but different ways in it. So one will reinforce that change, exaggerate the change. While negative feedback kind of goes in the opposite direction, right? It gets it. So we feel cold, we feel warm, body wants to cool it down. We feel cold, body wants to warm. So we just need to recognize and remember again. A lot of them do follow negative feedback. Just a few examples. We talk about uterine contractions, the expulsion of milk. Those are all positive. Clotting is kind of positive, but positive in the sense that platelets get there, they will stimulate more platelet aggregation. That's another one. It's also positive feedback. Okay. Sometimes we also antagonize. So let's talk about cascade. What that means is one stimulating point, it could be a release of another. Okay, so we're going to talk about the thyroid hormone one. Okay, that's the one we're going to look at. There is a hormone that's going to be released by the hypothalamus, which stimulates the pituitary gland to release its hormone. That hormone is going to go to another endocrine gland and then release the hormone from there. Right? So we'll look at the thyroid, and this is generally negative feedback. It doesn't just go back one step. Okay? It goes back up all steps along that cascade. And I'll use the example of thyroid hormone. Okay? So here's the image. Let me first tell you what the image is trying to show. Here's hypothalamus. Okay, that's the anterior pituitary gland. This is to show the thyroid gland. So hypothalamus produces the hormone TRH for short, thyrotropin releasing hormone. Okay, that goes into the blood, gets to the anterior pituitary gland. It's going to cause or stimulate the anterior pituitary gland, release thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH. Okay, and thyroid stimulating hormone goes in the blood. It goes to the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland will release thyroid hormones T3, T4. What are some functions of T3, T4? It states that it increases cellular metabolism, right? When cells are processing a lot of chemical reactions, they're going to release heat. Okay, so let's look at the stimulus cold. If you and I were cold, it's going to say to the hypothalamus, we're cold, feeling cold, so release TRH, thyrotropin releasing hormone. That will go to the anterior pituitary gland, will release TSH. TSH will go to the thyroid gland, release T3, T4. And that will increase cellular metabolism, which increases body temperature. Now let's say our body temperature is rising. Now it's high. It's going to first want to shut this down, right, or reduce that. Because if it's there, metabolism rates will be high. Okay, so it will tell this one to slow down, but it goes all the way back. It tells the anterior pituitary gland to stop producing TSH. It goes also and tells the hypothalamus to stop producing the TRH. Okay, so that's a cascade. Negative feedback will tell every single step, so that shuts it off. Because if we only shut this off and the TSH keeps trying to stimulate it, right, it's not going to work. Right? Does that make sense? It's going to stimulate it, send two opposite messages across. So we really go back to the whole thing. So let's talk about the thyroid gland. Okay, so we mentioned that the main function of it is to produce T3, T4. So if you look at histology specimen, this is the follicle. Okay, that's what produces the T3, T4. And we're going to have cells in between these follicles. This is one nice follicle. You can see the cuboidal cells surrounding this follicular fluid called stroma. Okay, that's one follicle. This is another follicle. These cells are called parafollicular cells. They will release the calcium. Okay, and that's just below our lactams. So T3, T4. T3 is more potent than T4, even though it has less iodine. Okay. As we mentioned, it increases based on metabolic rate, which in turn also releases heat. It also helps with the tissue growth, which is why it's needed for good growth of skeletal bones, even in the presence of growth hormones. It says to talk about helping maintain blood pressure. We want a good amount of thyroid hormones. Too high, what's it going to do to the blood pressure? It will increase blood pressure. That's one of the symptoms of hyperthyroidism. Okay, it will try to decrease blood pressure in hypothyroidism. Usually, our body kind of compensates to bring it back to normal, so we may not see it, but we see other symptoms. We'll talk about that. Okay, so hypothyroidism. What does hypo mean? Less, right? So this is producing less thyroid hormones. So these individuals, their metabolic rate is low, so there's weight gain. It's not breaking up the food, breaking up all the stored chemical molecules. They also feel cold, even in summertime. They're feeling cold because they're not able to generate heat. They feel sometimes lethargic because again, they cannot get going. Again, as I mentioned, blood pressure is not usually an issue. Whereas in hyperthyroidism, they are suffering with high blood pressure, high temperature, body temperature. They can't cool down. Even in the winter time, they struggle to cool down. They usually have weight loss because now they're burning off a lot of calories. They're sweating because the body temperature is high, can't cool it down. They're irritable too, right? If you notice when you are feeling sweaty and hot, you feel kind of edgy almost to say, right? Because irritable, that's common. With hyperthyroidism. So when we think about a swelling, do we generally think of a hyper state or a hypo state? Hyper, right? I want to talk to you about something that is a goiter. That's a swelling of the thyroid gland that develops when we have low iodine. This is what happened in the 60s. Okay? They found lots of individuals had thyroid goiters. Okay? Can we try and explain why that happened? Okay, this is due to iodine deficiency. That's my hint. Let's try and think about cascading. Any thoughts? Let me give a hint. So if we measure T3, T4, what would it be for these individuals? High, low, or normal? They have no iodine or low iodine. Low T3, T4, right? Because 3 and 4 is iodine. There's not enough raw materials. That level is going to be low. And our negative feedback, what is it going to do to the TSH? Let's even forget TRH. What's your TSH levels going to be? It's going to be high because T3, T4 is low, so the stimulus is for TSH to be produced. So it's actually going to be high. It's like having a factory, getting all these orders and having a disconnect, if you will, with what's really going on in the factory. Okay? And they're like, okay, let's just build a bigger factory. That's what the goiter is because the overstimulation of TSH levels will be high, are high in such patients. Okay? Because the T3, T4 is low, which means our negative feedback here is to try and raise it up. So to raise it up, we want higher TSH levels. Okay? So here, this is what we saw, and it does happen. Goiter form, the swelling of the thyroid. Okay? Let's talk about calcium. We mentioned it. So it's parathyroid hormone that's released when blood calcium is low, right? Because we want to break down the bone to release it. I always give the example of wallet, and I know we don't use cash a lot, but let's imagine we are using cash. Okay? Wallet versus bank. So if we have money in the bank, none in the wallet, we'll go and withdraw it from the bank. What's going to eventually happen? Unless we have a very nice big nest egg. That's going to run out, right? That's what happens now. Bone too, we can't just keep taking all the time. We will end up bone thinning, osteomalacia, possibly osteoporosis. So parathyroid is released when calcium levels in blood are low. Again, reminder, which bone cell does it stimulate? Osteoclasts, they break down. Okay? So here, one of these three will do that. So we're going to stimulate osteoclasts and in with osteoblasts. They also tell the kidneys don't let any calcium pass into the urine. Make sure you reabsorb all of them. They'll also send an impulse, or they will stimulate the intestines. If there's any calcium in the food that we are consuming, to absorb that calcium too. It's not just from bone. We also kind of work more, if you will, right? And lose less, kind of thing as well. Whereas calcitonin is released from where? Thyroid gland, the hormone, the cells are called parafollicular cells. These are in the thyroid gland. Calcitonin, they will do the opposite of it. They don't really do much on the intestines, but they do the urine to pass calcium, and they will bone. They will stimulate the osteoblasts. They will deposit the calcium in the bone and inhibit osteoclasts. So pancreas, we talked about them. What we need to additionally know is the name of those cells. It's the islets of Langerhans. Okay, that's what produces both insulin and glucagon. It's just two types, alpha and beta. Beta produces insulin, alpha produces the glucagon. Okay, so hopefully, if you forget, just think about when is insulin. That's my first question I ask, right? When is insulin released in our body? Right? It's after a meal when the glucose levels are rising. The other one is glucagon. Both of them are released from the islets of Langerhans. So structures within the pancreas. Let's talk about these two types of diabetes mellitus. Does anyone know what it translates to? Which was the test we used? I'm glad I was not practicing medicine at this time. Sweet urine, that's what it translates to. And they would taste it. We don't do that thing. Taste somebody else's, let alone your own. Right. Let's talk about the two types. what's type 1, another name for it? Insulin dependent. Why is it called insulin dependent? Yeah, why do these individuals need the supplemental insulin? Yeah, not produced by, what happened to the pancreas? So usually it's different. Type 1, why? Not usually malformation. No. Very rare.
Pancreas don't produce
Yeah.
any metabolic. In type 2 it produces some but nothing.
Yeah, we'll talk about it in 1 second. So it's an autoimmune disease. What does that mean?
Your body's fighting against itself.
Yeah, so the own immune system has killed off these islets of the lung, especially beta cells, right? So hence they do not produce insulin. Hence it is juvenile because it does. Usually in the teenagers, usually by the age of 20, 22, it's all being taken. Okay. Whereas the other one is used to be called non-insulin dependent. It's not perfect term because some people may need insulin, but the problem is here it's not the amount of insulin, right? What's another name for it besides a non-insulin? Insulin resistant, that's the better name for it, right? So these individuals do produce insulin, just their body is not responding. Right? So there's a two different types. They have enough insulin. Usually, initially, they're treated with medications first. The ideal one, the best drug of choice, does anyone know for type 2? Metformin. Everybody should be on that unless they have a side effect or a contraindication. So that one will make insulin more sensitive. All other drugs basically will increase the insulin levels, which eventually, if you keep doing that for a number of times, the pancreas will stop producing insulin and they become insulin. But yeah, that is more insulin resistance rather than insulin resistance.
If they're still producing insulin now and they are insulin resistant to their own insulin, if they introduce like another form of insulin, will it like make it like more like heightened? Like or will it
Yes and no.
Okay.
So the resistance we still have to try and treat, but if you just keep bombarding with a lot of insulin, that's what will happen when you do inject, and that's what does happen even in them. Their insulin levels are high. It eventually will respond, but not respond. So it needs like 100 instead of say 10. Molecules per liter. That makes sense. So it does respond, but less. Next one is the adrenal gland. We talked about the adrenal medulla, right? What do they produce? Epinephrine and norepinephrine. While the adrenal cortex is what we're going to elaborate here. There's 3 groups of hormones the adrenal cortex will produce. It's called mineralocorticoids. This is talking about ions. Okay, the best one that we would want to talk about, and we'll do this in the urinary system part, is aldosterone. Okay, that promotes sodium reabsorption, water follows. So it's a hormone that's released when our blood pressure is low. Okay. The next one is the cortisol. The cortisol is called glucocorticoids. I mentioned how cortisol increases glucose levels, amongst others. Why do we give cortisol as a treatment? What kind of aim? It's not necessarily illness. When might we give cortisol shots? Hydrocortisone tablets. What? Reduce inflammation, right? So it does cause, so these ones will have anti-inflammatory effect, which is why we give them. What we do is, if you have arthritis, you may get a cortisol shot, so trying to decrease the inflammation. And I mentioned that we also have the other hormones, whether it's testosterone, progesterone, estrogen, they're also produced in smaller amounts, but they're still produced compared to the question. Okay, let's take a break there, and then we will start a new chapter.
this next chapter is.
Not including for this exam, for the next one, to the fourth. Yeah, this one's the nervous system and endocrine system.